Hello, everyone. It's Pastor Judy. Now, I remember when I was a little girl how much joy I found in collecting coins in my piggy bank. At first, there was that loud clink when the pennies hit the bottom. Later, as the piggy bank began to fill, that sound softened into a muted clink. And even though the sound changed, the value didn't disappear. It actually increased. And trust works much the same way. Trust doesn't appear all at once, it builds slowly. One small act of faithfulness at a time, one memory added to another. And over time, these memories begin to hold real weight. And yet, sometimes trust feels elusive. Sometimes God's timing feels uncertain in our lives. But Scripture, it doesn't tell us to figure everything out. Scripture tells us to remember. Now, a few weeks ago, before my time off, we talked about looking back and leaning forward. Now, you may remember the illustration of the rear view mirror and the windshield. The point I was making was simple. The rear view mirror is smaller than the windshield because we are meant to focus more on what's ahead of us than what's behind. And I still believe that's true. But there are moments, and there are holy moments, when looking back is exactly what helps us to trust God with what's next. And remembering God's faithfulness doesn't trap us in the past, it strengthens us for the future. We'll be reading Psalm 77, verses 11 through 14, and I invite you to hear these words. I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate on all your work and muse on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is so great as our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have displayed your might among the peoples. Now, the psalmist isn't reminiscing out of nostalgia. He's remembering out of necessity. Think about the moments in your own life when circumstances feel overwhelming. What is the first thing that you tend to focus on? More often than not, we focus on what God hasn't done yet. And when we forget God's faithfulness, anxiety creeps in, impatience grows, and we start trying to manage God's timing ourselves. Fear thrives when memory fades, and memory fades not because God stops working, but because life keeps moving. Our gospel today speaks to this idea of scarcity versus memory. Mark chapter 6, verses 34 through 44. Hear these words. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now very late. Send them away so they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy something for themselves to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "Are we to go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he ordered them to get all the people to sit down in groups in the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces, and of the fish, those who had eaten the loaves numbered 5,000 men. God speaks to us through the reading of the scripture, and the people responded, "Thanks be to God." Now, we usually focus on the miracle in this story, and rightly so. But today I want us to notice what happens before the miracle. The disciples, they bring the problem to Jesus. It is late and the people are hungry, and Jesus responds with the words that stop them short. "You give them something to eat," he says. Is Jesus being unrealistic, or is he being intentional? Jesus asks a simple question. "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." The disciples are focused on scarcity. Not enough food. There's not enough money. There's not enough time. Not enough answers. And their response makes sense. It's logical. It's practical. Send the people away. And in other words, this problem is bigger than us. Jesus redirects them from scarcity to memory. He isn't gathering inventory, he's inviting remembrance. This isn't the first time the disciples have seen Jesus provide. We need to remember that. They've witnessed the sick being healed, the storm being calmed, and the demons being cast out. But fear has erased their memory. So Jesus slows them down. He asks them to look again, not at what's missing, but at what God has already placed before them. 5 loaves and 2 fish. I invite you to notice the order things take place. Jesus takes the bread and he looks to heaven. He gives thanks and he breaks the bread. Before the multiplication comes gratitude. Jesus trusts the Father's provision before there is that visible abundance. Remembering God's faithfulness isn't passive reflection, it is active trust. Because when life gets easier, the memory, frankly, gets weaker. In Deuteronomy 8, as we turn back to the Old Testament, God's people are standing at the edge of the promised land. They're looking towards blessing, stability, and abundance. But Moses does not warn them against the enemies. He warns them about forgetting. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God, is what he says. And why is that? Because in the wilderness, every meal reminded them of dependence. Every step required trust. God's presence was obvious. But in the promised land, food will grow. Houses will stand. Life will feel stable. And you know what? God knows something about the human heart. That comfort dulls memory faster than hardship does. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, but I bet most of you have. It's moving day. Think about that moving into a new home. And at first you remember who helped you load the truck, who brought the pizza, and how exhausting it was. However, give it a few months. Boxes have now been unpacked and routines are restored, and those memories begin to fade. The help gets forgotten because the need is gone. And that's what God is warning Israel about. And if we are honest, it's what happens to us. When we no longer need God in obvious ways, we stop noticing God in everyday ways. That's why remembering must be practiced. Not because God stops being faithful, but because life gets easier. Scripture doesn't merely invite us to remember, it commands us to. Now, as we close out today's message, I invite you to reflect on your own spiritual journey. When you accept Jesus, you are beginning anew. And just like a new piggy bank, at first every coin you put in makes a loud sound. Every coin is easy to notice. It's easy to remember. Similarly, when your faith journey is new or when you're walking through a difficult season, it's easy to see God at work. However, there are times you find yourself in a season where the muted pennies in the bank you find that are hearing God has become muted. Don't mistake quiet for emptiness. Remember that every prayer is answered, every step taken when you didn't know the way, every moment God showed up when you had nothing left. Those are coins in the bank. And when you find that trust feels hard, when fear tries to take over, and when the future feels uncertain, you don't have to manufacture faith. You open the bank. You remember the same God who filled the bank in the past can be trusted with whatever lies ahead.